In 1986, a family of 4 set out for a weekend on Lake Whitney. They packed sandwiches, fishing poles, sunscreen, everything you'd expect for a Texas summer getaway. By Monday morning, their house was still quiet. The cat hadn't been fed, the mail was piling up, and no one had heard from them again. 11 years later, a fisherman pulled something from the mud, and with it, the first thread that would unravel everything. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Carol Jennings. I was 34 that summer, born and raised in Whitney, Texas, same as my sister Linda. We were the kind of town where people waved when they passed, where church bulletins doubled as community newsletters. Linda lived 3 streets over with her husband Steve and their 2 kids, Emily, 13, and little Tyler, who was 10 that year. Steve worked at Rucker's auto same shop my dad used to wrench at before he passed. Linda taught Sunday school, made the best banana pudding I ever tasted, and kept a garden that could shame half the county. Life wasn't perfect, but it was steady, predictable. I still remember the last time I saw them. It was a Saturday morning, hot, already pushing 85 before breakfast. I stopped by their house to drop off some potato salad in one of those old Corningware dishes. Linda answered the door with sunscreen on her nose and the kids bouncing behind her already in swimsuits. "Headed to the lake," she said, smiling. Steve finally rented that little boat he kept talking about. I remember Emily was holding her sketch pad and Tyler was fiddling with his new Swiss Army knife, proud as anything. They were packed up, cooler full of sandwiches, sodas, towels rolled tight. Steve waved from the driveway, loading the last tackle box into the back of their Chevy. Promised them a real Texas fishing trip, he said, grinning. One they'd remember. Linda laughed. "If we don't come home with catfish, don't let the cat starve." That was Linda, always thinking ahead. They backed out slow, the kids waving at the neighbors. Their dog Daisy barked from the porch, but stayed behind. She never did like the boat. Everything about that morning looked normal. Too normal, I guess, when I think back now. They were only supposed to be gone for the weekend. Back by Sunday night, Steve had a shift Monday, and Emily was signed up for the summer camp bus first thing. But Monday came, and the porch light was still on. Their car never pulled in. By noon, I was calling everyone I could think of. Their landline rang and rang. I stopped by the house mail, still in the box note on the fridge. "Don't forget to feed the cat. Back Monday." Daisy had knocked over her water bowl. She was pacing. I tried not to panic, but something about that silence. It wasn't right. I didn't sleep much that night. After the sheriff left, I sat on the front steps of Linda and Steve's house, watching the porch light burn, like it always did when they were out late. Daisy whined every now and then, ears perked toward the road, like she still expected the sound of tires crunching gravel. But nothing came. By morning, I knew something was wrong, deeper than just a delay. Steve wasn't the kind of man to skip work without a call. Emily wouldn't miss camp. And Linda, she was the type to remind you about your dentist appointment 3 weeks early. I called the sheriff's office again, and by mid-morning they'd launched a formal search. Volunteers gathered with maps and bug spray. Boats combed the shoreline. Helicopters passed overhead. They even brought in dogs. For days we walked those woods and circled that water, calling names into silence. Nothing turned up. Not a towel. Not a sandwich wrapper. Not a life jacket. It was as if the lake had swallowed them whole. After a week, the media started trickling in. A Dallas news crew parked near the boat launch, snapping photos of volunteers dragging the shore with rakes and poles. They interviewed the neighbors, even talked to the gas station clerk who'd sold Linda a pack of sodas the morning they left. Everyone said the same thing. They looked happy normal. Emily waved at the kids on bikes. Tyler showed off his pocket knife. There wasn't a hint that anything was wrong. And yet, 11 years passed. No boat, no bodies, no answers. People in Whitney whispered their own theories. Some said it had to be an accident. Maybe they hit a submerged log. Maybe the boat tipped and no one had their vests on. Others leaned into darker ideas, that someone had followed them, that Steve had enemies from the garage, that maybe they'd planned it run off to Mexico or changed their names. I never bought that. Linda wouldn't have left Daisy, wouldn't have let the cat go unfed. Their house stayed empty all that time. Mail kept piling up. The porch sagged a little more each year. Every now and then I'd drive by half hoping the screen door would swing open and Linda would wave me in like she used to, but it never happened. Not until the summer of '97, when a fisherman named Jake Landry snagged something in his net while dragging for catfish. He thought it was an old tire at first, felt the weight, the resistance, but when he pulled it up, it wasn't rubber. It was metal. The side of a boat, sun-bleached and half-rotted, crusted with mud and tangled in reeds, and just barely visible, scuffed across the bow in faded red paint, were the words, Linda Lee. When they called me, I was at work filing invoices at the clinic. I don't remember much about driving to the lake. I just remember my hands shaking on the wheel and Sheriff Malone standing by the shoreline with his arms crossed, watching the forensic team haul the boat onto a blue tarp. It was half crushed on one side as if it had been pinned under a log or pulled down into the silt. The seats were torn. One oar was snapped clean through. They found a red backpack stowed in a rear compartment. Inside was Emily's sketchbook pages stuck together from water damage but still readable in places. One drawing showed a stick figure version of Steve holding a fishing pole. She'd written "Best Summer Ever" in big loopy letters across the bottom. They also found a rusted Swiss Army knife, Steve's initials scratched into the side, and a Polaroid photo, one I hadn't seen before, showing the four of them on the dock, all smiling, the lake behind them catching the sun just right. But the boat was empty. No clothes, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just one thing that didn't sit right, a muddy child's shoe wedged behind the driver's seat. It didn't match anything we knew of. It was smaller than Tyler's, more worn, like it had been used for years. The sheriff didn't speculate, but people did. They always do. Maybe the kids had a friend along. Maybe someone else was with them. Some neighbors said they remembered Steve looking tense the week before they left, something about a customer who'd gotten angry at the shop. A few folks at church remembered Emily seeming withdrawn, quiet, even for her. And of course, that got people talking again. Rumors picked back up like they'd never stopped. The sheriff reopened the investigation formally. Texas Rangers came down. Dive teams brought sonar and underwater drones. They cordoned off the area and started pulling logs from the cove where the boat was found. One morning, just after sunrise, a diver surfaced near an old cypress snag holding something in his glove. Sheriff Malone called me to the site. I stood with him as they unwrapped Emily's bracelet, a tiny silver chain with her name etched in a heart charm. The clasp was broken. Tangled in it was a piece of nylon rope cut clean at both ends. I felt my stomach drop. That bracelet had been a birthday gift. Linda bought it from the pharmacy gift shelf. Said it was nothing fancy, but Emily loved it anyway. I'd seen her wearing it the day they left. Later that afternoon, I was asked to come back to the dock where Detective Angela Hayes wanted me to look at the contents again. She was new to our county, had transferred in from Dallas when the case picked up steam. She was the type who listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, she chose her words like she was measuring them. We stood by a folding table under a shade tent. Emily's sketchbook, Tyler's plastic action figure, a picnic blanket, a few Polaroids, and the muddy shoe. Angela pulled out the photo from the dock, the one they'd found in the boat, and held it under the light. "Carol," she said, "take a look here in the corner, behind the boathouse window." At first, I didn't see anything, just glare the wood-trim shadows. But then I caught it, a faint outline. A figure. Tall, slightly hunched, wearing a cap, standing behind the family, not smiling, not waving, just there. I felt something tighten in my chest. "That's not Steve," I said. "That's not me either." And we didn't have guests that day. Angela nodded. I don't think he's with the family. I think he's watching them. They brought in a forensic photographer to enhance the image. We didn't get much, no face, no badge, no obvious detail, just posture, broad shoulders, stillness, intent. That evening I sat in my car for nearly an hour before driving home. The bracelet, the photo, the shoe. They weren't answers, but they weren't nothing. And something about that figure hidden in the glass, half there, half gone, settled over the town like a new kind of silence. A silence we hadn't heard before. One that made you wonder if maybe someone had been listening all along and waiting. I brought the photograph to the sheriff's office the next morning. I'd spent half the night staring at it, trying to make sense of the shape in the boathouse window, the way the figure stood just slightly turned like he was listening or waiting. Sheriff Malone sat behind his desk reading over reports. I slid the photo across the wood, careful not to smudge the corner where the shadow stood. He looked at it, squinted, and nodded slowly. We had this processed, he said, but we didn't see that before. He didn't sound surprised, just tired. You think someone was watching them? I said. He didn't answer, but he didn't push back either, just leaned back in his chair and let out a breath. The next day, we had the photo enhanced, again, high resolution, better contrast. And there it was. Not a trick of light. Not a tree branch. A man. Broad-shouldered cap, low over his face, standing still. Not interacting with the family. Just behind them. Angela didn't say much during that briefing. She just stood there with her arms crossed, her eyes locked on the image like it was something that could shift if she stared long enough. After the meeting, she walked the shoreline by herself for nearly an hour. The town was starting to feel it too, this new weight. People talked again. You could hear it in the post office outside the diner, hushed voices saying maybe they weren't alone on that dock. Maybe someone was there and maybe they never left. I started asking around. I wasn't part of the department, but folks still knew I was family, and sometimes that made them more likely to talk. One woman said she remembered a man sitting in an old rowboat that weekend, green paint chipping drifting near the launch ramp. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. Another said she'd seen someone standing near the gas station early that Sunday morning, just watching as Linda filled up the cooler with ice. But when I passed those names to the sheriff's office, they nodded politely and said, "We'll look into it," like they were checking boxes more than chasing leads. I could feel it in the way they moved. This case was old, heavy, full of loose ends. They weren't dismissive, not exactly, but you could tell they'd been burned before. Angela seemed different, though. She followed up. She called people twice. She circled names. She took the muddy shoe back to the lab and asked them to run the tread pattern again, even though they'd already logged it. That week, she invited me to meet her out by the edge of the woods where the dive team had recovered Emily's bracelet. The ground was soft from rain, and the air smelled like cedar and algae. She crouched down by a cypress root pointed at a patch of disturbed soil. There was a nylon rope here, she said, frayed on both ends. Same kind as the one tangled in the bracelet. I asked what that meant. She didn't answer right away, just kept scanning the ground. It means someone tied something, or someone. Back at the station, she showed me the note found in the red lunchbox. I'd never seen it before, child's handwriting smeared from water. "We are hiding. If you find this, please look for us. We want to go home." It was signed Tyler. I stared at the paper for a long time. Then I said, "So why didn't they come back?" Angela just looked at me steady and said, "Maybe someone didn't let them." We asked around again, this time more pointedly. Had anyone seen the family with a third person? Was anyone unaccounted for that weekend? Did anyone remember a man with a green boat? Some people said yes, but the memories were fuzzy. Too many years, too many rumors layered on top of half-truths. And when Angela submitted the enhanced photo and the lunchbox note to the department as fresh evidence, it didn't stir the urgency we hoped for. Sheriff Malone called me in a few days later, said they appreciated my help, but they needed to manage expectations. The phrase stuck with me. Manage expectations. Like we were asking for too much by wanting to know what happened to a missing family. I tried to argue, told him we had a face, a rope, a note. He nodded. Let me finish, then said, "There's no proof of a crime yet." That evening I sat on the back steps of my own house staring at the pines as the wind came through. I kept thinking about the note. We want to go home. That didn't sound like drowning. That didn't sound like a family lost in the woods. It sounded like kids who'd been kept somewhere long enough to write it down and hope someone would find it. The next day, Angela went back to the Carson house with a forensic photographer. She walked through each room slowly like she was looking for something nobody else had thought to check. On the fridge, still faded after all those years, was the original note from Linda, "Don't forget to feed the cat." Back Monday. She took a picture of it. Then she opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out an old Polaroid of Emily at the lake wearing the same blue towel found wrapped around a tree root last week. Angela had started piecing together a timeline: arrival at the lake, the last sighting at the dock the moment they vanished. Everything pointed to that window between noon and sundown. Everything except one strange detail. The gas station attendant came forward again, swearing he'd seen Linda on Monday, 2 days after they were supposed to be home. He said she looked tired, like she hadn't slept. Bought a bottle of water and a candy bar. Paid in cash. No kids with her. He said he didn't think much of it until he saw her face in the paper years later. Angela brought that to the sheriff. They said the memory couldn't be trusted. Too much time had passed. No camera footage, no timestamp, no purchase log. But it stuck with both of us. If she had been seen after Sunday, then the timeline was wrong. Then someone had kept them alive, at least for a little while. A few nights later, Angela stopped by my place. Said she'd been going over property maps of the lake from 1986. There were 2 old cabins on the north bank, half collapsed, mostly forgotten, rumored to be used by squatters back in the day. They hadn't been searched back then too far from where the boat was found. She asked if I'd come with her the next day. I said yes. We left before sunrise. The road was narrow and overgrown, the kind of path only someone local would know. As we hiked in, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no frogs, just wind moving through trees that hadn't been touched in decades. Angela didn't say much. She just kept walking. Somewhere up ahead, something was waiting for us. We didn't know what. But we both had the same feeling. That this time someone might actually believe what we were about to find. The trail to the cabins wasn't marked anymore, just a faint crease in the undergrowth that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. We walked in silence, me and Angela, the air heavy with that late summer stillness where even the insects seemed to go quiet. The trees pressed in from both sides, and the deeper we went, the more it felt like the rest of the world had fallen away. When the cabins came into view, they looked more like shadows than structures. 2 sagging roofs, boards warped and grayed from weather windows, either broken or long clouded over with time. Angela stepped onto the porch first. The boards creaked but held. I followed behind, careful where I put my feet. Inside it smelled like rot and dust and something else I couldn't quite name, maybe damp earth or the remains of something left too long. Angela moved with her flashlight low, scanning corners, checking under a collapsed chair behind a shelf. The walls were stripped bare except for a few nails and an old calendar from 1984 pages stuck together from moisture. In the second cabin, she paused by the back wall. One of the boards didn't look right, like it had been pried loose once and nailed back hastily. She knelt down, worked her fingers into the seam, and after a moment the panel gave way. Behind it, wedged into the wall cavity, was an old metal tackle box. She set it down between us and cracked it open. Inside were three things: a plastic toy ring, the kind you used to get from a quarter machine, a Polaroid photo of two children holding up small fish by the lakeshore, and a ring of old car keys with a faded keychain shaped like a cowboy boot. I took one look at the photo and knew. It was Emily and Tyler. They couldn't have been older than 7 and 4 in it, standing in the same swimsuits they wore that summer. Emily's towel was draped over her shoulder, the same one they found caught in the willow roots. I felt my knees go soft. Angela didn't say anything, just bagged the items and carefully slid the wall panel back into place. Later that evening, we sat on the tailgate of her cruiser near the edge of the lake, watching the last bit of light fold itself behind the tree line. I asked her if this was enough, if this could finally be the turning point. She shook her head slowly. "Not yet," she said, "but it's getting harder to explain away." That was the way it was then. You didn't get big breakthroughs, just quiet pieces. A photograph, a bracelet, a scrap of handwriting. And in between each one, more silence. The town was starting to move on again. The press had thinned out. The news vans had gone back to Dallas. And even the sheriff seemed less inclined to push. Said he had other cases piling up. Said they'd keep it open, but resources were tight. I didn't argue. I'd heard it all before. Angela kept going. Every few days I'd find her out there walking the shoreline alone, sitting by the boat launch with her notes spread across the hood of her car. Some folks started calling her obsessed, said she was chasing ghosts. I knew better. I'd seen the way she looked at that lunchbox note. Like it wasn't just a clue, but a promise. One afternoon I came home and found her truck already in my driveway. She was sitting on my porch elbows on her knees, holding a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a pink beret, the kind Emily used to wear. Found it near the cabins, she said, under the leaves. I didn't have words for it. I just nodded and stepped aside to let her in. We laid everything out on my kitchen table. The photo, the bracelet, the towel, the lunchbox, the beret. None of it said exactly what had happened, but all of it together said something had. Angela started drawing lines between things. The rowboat sighting, the muddy footprints, the rope. She put together a rough timeline: arrival at the lake lunch on the dock, something seen or someone met, and then movement. Fast, maybe frantic. Towels left behind. The boat drifting, then hiding. The cabins, the photo. A postcard found later, postmarked weeks after the disappearance. Emily's handwriting. Saw fireflies tonight. "Miss you, Grandma. I brought that postcard to the sheriff myself when we found it buried in a shoebox in my mother's old closet. He looked it over, nodded politely, and said it didn't prove much. Could have been a prank. Could have been misdated. Could have been anything." That was the moment I stopped expecting help from anyone but Angela. She went back through every property record from that summer. Hunting cabins, fishing leases, land plots that had changed hands in a hurry. We drove out to a parcel listed under a defunct real estate holding from Dallas. Just brush and mesquite now, but back then it had been a small camp. Angela walked the ground slowly, eyes scanning for anything out of place, and then half buried beneath the dirt she found another beret. Same plastic, same pale pink. By then it was clear to both of us. The family had gotten away from the lake. Maybe they fled. Maybe they were taken. But they hadn't drowned. Not right away. Someone had seen them. Someone had been nearby. And someone still might remember. Angela put in a request to speak with an elderly woman who used to live near the North Shore, Thelma Reed. She remembered that summer well. Said there were voices in the woods one night shouting, a child crying, a man yelling something sharp and angry. She'd thought it was just kids trespassing. Didn't want to be the busybody, she said, clutching a tissue. Didn't think it was my place. Angela thanked her gently. Didn't push. Just listened. That was how she always worked, quiet, patient, waiting for things to surface. When we got back to town, we sat in the diner. She scribbled notes while the waitress refilled our coffee. I asked her what she thought we were chasing now. She said, "I think we're close to a name. Maybe not yet. But we're close." And I believed her. Not because we had proof, but because the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was starting to echo. We weren't expecting anything new that week. The press had moved on again, and even the sheriff had stepped back from the lake. Angela was still going through the same files for the third time, but I could tell she was running on instinct now more than leads. Still, she came by the house every evening, sat at my table with her folders and notes spread across the vinyl tablecloth, retracing the same path, like maybe this time it would break open. We were both tired, but neither of us said it out loud. That's how it was by then, just quiet work and too much coffee. One morning, she came in earlier than usual. Said she'd found something strange while reviewing the Polaroids from the boat, the same stack we'd looked at a dozen times already. She pointed to one I hadn't paid much attention to before. It showed Emily and Tyler standing on the dock, grinning with wet hair, holding up fish that were probably too small to keep. The lake behind them was pale and still, but Angela was focused on the left corner just beyond the railing. There, she said, tapping the photo. In the trees. I leaned in. It wasn't clear at first, but once she said it, I saw it just a hint of movement, the shape of a person half hidden in the brush. Not close enough to be part of the family, but not far either. Someone watching. The same size, the same posture as the figure in the boathouse window. Angela sent it off to be enhanced again. Said maybe this angle would give us something more. She didn't get her hopes up, but she didn't let go of it either. That's what she did, held on even when no one else would. Later that day, a man called the sheriff's office. Said his father had been the groundskeeper for a set of hunting cabins up along the lake in the mid-'80s. The same cabins Angela had flagged on the old property records. The man remembered being a kid sitting in his father's truck watching two children run near the trees. Said the girl had a blue towel over her shoulders and the boy carried a red lunchbox. I felt the air shift when Angela told me. She asked if he'd seen their parents. He said no, just the kids. His father had told him not to speak to them, said the man they were with didn't want company. The cabins were gone now, bulldozed sometime in the 90s, but Angela still drove out there, boots sinking in the soft dirt where the foundations used to be. She walked the perimeter slow and quiet. The brush had grown up tall, and thorns caught her sleeves as she moved. After an hour or so, she knelt by a patch of bare earth and started brushing away the leaves with her hands. That's when she found it. A plastic barrette half buried in the mud. Faded pink. When she brought it back to the lab, I didn't say a word. I just stared at it. Same shape, same size as the ones Emily wore. The same ones we used to buy in bulk at the drugstore when she was little. It had been in the ground a long time, years probably, but it was still intact. The next day, news spread. Small-town talk travels faster than any official release, and by afternoon, folks were dropping by the station offering old stories they hadn't thought about in decades. One woman said she remembered a station wagon parked by the lake that weekend, covered in dust, engine still warm when she walked her dog. Another found a credit card slip from 1986 in a box of receipts. Steve's name on it dated 2 days after the family supposedly vanished. Angela pieced together a timeline, and for the first time it started to look like something that made sense. The Carsons had made it off the lake. Maybe only briefly, maybe in hiding. But they hadn't vanished that Sunday. Someone had seen them, and someone had kept them from coming home. Around the same time, a construction crew near the water unearthed a rusted toolbox beneath a layer of silt. It was sealed shut with corrosion, and it took 2 men with gloves and pliers to get it open. Inside was a spiral notebook, moldy and warped but still legible in parts. The first page was dated June 18, 1986. If anyone finds this, please let my family know we're alive. Signed, John C. Angela called me as soon as she read it. The pages weren't full. Most were damaged. but what remained painted a picture we hadn't dared to imagine. They had found shelter somewhere. They were frightened, hungry. The kids were cold at night. Emily had drawn fireflies. Tyler missed his toy boat. Linda had a hurt ankle, maybe a sprain. And someone they only referred to as the man was nearby. We hear footsteps at night, one entry read. Emily is scared. I pray someone finds us soon. I held that page in my hands and didn't speak for a long time. That handwriting tight and sharp, written like someone afraid they might not get another chance. I remembered Steve sitting at my kitchen table years earlier, tapping a pen against a legal pad while he made lists for the camping trip. Same neat slant, same careful lettering. Angela and I sat in the sheriff's office that night, the notebook between us. She didn't try to explain it. Neither of us did. We didn't need to. This was the clue we'd missed, not just the physical evidence, but the voice. The story they left behind buried in mud and time. And yet, even with the pages in our hands, there was no sign of where they'd gone after that. The entries stopped after 3 weeks. No date, no goodbye. Just silence again. But silence meant something different now. It meant we were close. By midsummer, the water level in Lake Whitney had dropped just enough to expose the shallow northern inlet, an area dense with reeds and fallen trees, the only part of the lake the original search teams hadn't been able to fully comb back in '86. Angela stood with Sheriff Malone and the divers on the bank that morning reviewing the map and checking coordinates, even though the trees themselves had shifted and grown over the years. It was early, the air still damp and heavy, and you could hear the soft slap of water against the roots. Angela looked over her shoulder at me and said quietly, "Let's give it one more look. I can't leave it alone." The divers slid into the water just before the sun broke fully through. For a while there was only the sound of rustling brush and the occasional radio check. But then a call came through, low and urgent. A diver had surfaced holding a set of keys. The tag was warped from the water, but the lettering was still there. Carson family boat. I stepped closer, but stayed behind the tape. Angela knelt in the mud as they handed it off, then looked up at Malone. These were in Steve's jacket. Linda told me they only had one set. The divers went back in. Over the next 2 hours, they brought up a woman's sandal, a cracked plastic lunchbox, and near the edge of a submerged willow, a blue towel embroidered with Emily in the corner. We laid everything out on a tarp in the shade, same as we had before. The towel was still intact, stiff with silt and time. The lunchbox had warped at the edges, but inside, sealed in a zippered pouch, was another note. The ink had bled, but you could still read it. "We are hiding. If you find this, please look for us. We want to go home. Tyler." Angela didn't say anything for a long time. Neither did I. It wasn't the kind of moment that called for talking. We just stood there while the lake rippled behind us and the air felt heavier than it should have for that time of day. That afternoon, she and I met back at the station. She spread out every clue on the conference table: photos, bracelets, notes, the barrette, the notebook, the tackle box, the keys. It looked like a makeshift timeline, except there were still more questions than days. Angela ran her finger down the sequence and said, "They got away." At least for a while. But something or someone kept them from staying gone. That's when she started going through the names again. Every person who lived near the lake. Every ranger, fisherman, squatter, landowner. She worked in silence sometimes for hours. I'd sit across from her and listen to the clock tick, watching the light change through the blinds. She pulled the file on the green rowboat, same paint as what was found on the muddy shoe. That boat had been reported stolen the same week the Carsons disappeared from the other side of the lake. No one ever recovered it. That detail had been overlooked for years. Then she found the name Clyde Tatum. She pulled it from an old report filed by a deputy in '86. He'd questioned Tatum briefly after a neighbor reported seeing a beat-up truck parked near the trail the day after the Carsons went missing. At the time, it didn't go anywhere. Tatum was known to be odd, but not criminal. Lived in a trailer on the edge of the woods, worked nights at the mill. Had a reputation for being reclusive, territorial. Angela stared at the report a long time, tapping her pen slowly. He'd have known the trails, she said. He'd have known the cabins. And the lake. We drove out to where his trailer used to sit. Nothing was left but a few rusted pipes and the stone ring of an old fire pit. Angela crouched by it, brushed away some ash and charred wood. Then she paused. Wedged under the stones was something blackened but still whole. A plastic button partly melted but with stitching marks. She pulled out a Ziploc from her bag and sealed it. Emily's jacket had a missing button, she said quietly. The forensics team came back 2 days later. Under the pit, they found fragments of a child's backpack, 2 barrettes, and a handful of colored pencils. Angela laid them beside the photos back at the station and just stood there. Not crying, not angry, just still. She reviewed the original interviews again this time, looking for anything connected to Tatum. A neighbor recalled him talking about city folk who didn't respect the land. Another remembered his truck parked crooked on a logging road, windows fogged. One said he saw a man who looked like Tatum come back from the woods that summer, covered in mud, eyes wide like something had gone wrong. But Tatum had left the area within weeks. No forwarding address. No family close by except one brother who still lived upstate. Angela called him. He hadn't spoken to Clyde in years. Didn't know where he'd gone. Said the last time they talked, Clyde had mentioned fixing a problem down at the lake but wouldn't say what it was. And then, just as the search started to slow again, Angela got a letter. No return name, just a postmark from northern Arkansas. Inside was a photograph, old, faded, creased at the edges. It showed the Carson family's boat, half submerged in reeds. In the background, just barely visible, was a man standing at the tree line. His profile was clear enough to make out a nose, the slope of a chin, the shape of his shoulders. Angela laid it beside the other photos. Same figure, same build. There was a note with the photo. Just a sentence written in uneven block letters. I have information about what happened at Lake Whitney. Please come alone. Angela looked at me that night as we sat outside the station, the summer air still thick with heat. If this is a trap, I'll know it. But if it's real, this could be it. She left at dawn. Packed light. Took copies of everything, notes, photos, evidence tags. She told Malone she'd check in every few hours. But I think she knew even then some roads you drive by yourself. The photo stayed behind on her desk. I remember staring at it long after she pulled out of the lot. That same outline, that same stillness in the trees. The man we'd been chasing for months. Maybe years. And for the first time, I let myself wonder what it must have been like for Linda and the kids to see him standing there. Not moving. Just watching. Angela drove through Arkansas with the photo beside her on the dashboard. The same man we'd seen in the trees. The same outline we'd traced from the boathouse window and dockside photo. The sun was already low when she pulled into Jasper, a quiet town tucked into the hills. She followed the address on the envelope to a small post office at the edge of town. Gravel lot. One flag barely catching in the wind. She waited for a while. Nobody came. Just an older woman collecting mail and a stray dog wandering through the grass. Then her phone buzzed. Blocked number. A single message. Go to the diner across the street. Ask for apple pie. Angela watched the street before crossing. The diner looked like something out of another decade, neon sign, humming windows, fogged from the fryer. Inside, 3 truckers sat at the counter, silent but watching. She sat in booth 7 like the message said. The waitress didn't ask anything, just nodded and brought the pie. 5 minutes passed before a man slid into the seat across from her. Mid-70s, rough hands, old ball cap pulled low. He looked at her for a long time before he said anything. "You're from Texas," he said, not asking. Angela nodded. "I knew someone would come eventually." He introduced himself only as Ed, said he used to work with Tatum, said he'd known something was wrong for a long time. He sipped his coffee like it was buying him time. Then he opened up. Told Angela that Clyde Tatum worked night shifts at the sawmill back in the 80s, kept to himself mostly. But around the time the Carsons vanished, something shifted. Ed said Tatum came in one morning mud up to his knees, eyes wild, shaking as he lit a cigarette. Said he'd been dealing with trespassers. Wouldn't say more. Wouldn't talk to anyone for days after that. Later, when Tatum skipped town, Ed helped clean out his trailer. Found a box of old belongings, trash mostly. Rusted tools, newspaper clippings. But inside it was a photo. The same one Angela now held in her hands. The Carson boat in the reeds. A man in the background face turned just enough to match the outline from our earlier shots. Angela asked if he was sure it was Clyde. Ed nodded once. I never forgot that look. He said he hadn't come forward back then because he was scared. Tatum had a mean streak, and in towns like that, folks learn not to look too long at things they don't want to see. Angela thanked him, slid him her card, and left before the sun fully dropped. She called Malone that night. The sheriff's office filed for a warrant coordinated with Arkansas State Police. Within 48 hours, they found Tatum living under a false name near Little Rock, just off a county road in a camper behind a supply store. He didn't resist when they took him in. Barely spoke at all. Just stared through the one-way mirror like he wasn't even there. They brought Angela in to observe the interview. It took hours, but eventually, under pressure, Tatum began to talk. He said he found the family's boat pulled up near the inlet. Said they were panicked already off the dock, already hiding. He claimed he only meant to scare them off to make a point about private land and respecting boundaries. But something happened. A confrontation, maybe. He wouldn't say exactly. He said John Carson died on his property, called it an accident. That part didn't hold water and he knew it. He said the mother and kids ran. Said he panicked, buried the father, and left the rest in the woods. He swore he didn't chase them. That he didn't hurt them. That he just walked away. Angela didn't say anything at first. Just let him keep talking. Then she asked one question. "Do you remember the bracelet?" He looked up. Just for a second. That was enough. Authorities used his confession to secure a search of his former property, now just acres of overgrown brush. They brought in ground-penetrating radar cadaver dogs, the full team. It didn't take long. Under a collapsed root cellar hidden beneath rotted timbers and stone, they found what was left of a makeshift shelter. Scraps of fabric, a torn blanket, a small patch of initials carved into the wall, CC. Emily and Tyler's handwriting. DNA confirmed later what we feared and hoped all at once. They'd been there. They'd survived. Weeks. Maybe longer. Angela stood with me at the edge of that clearing as they sealed off the site. She didn't speak. Just looked down into that dark opening and let the air settle around her. We had no bodies, no names carved in stone, but we had truth. At least enough of it to know what happened in the broadest strokes. Tatum led them there. The family splintered. John died. The rest hid. And then at some point someone else stepped in. Angela suspected it before the tests even came back, because buried among the debris behind a stack of broken boards was an old tin marked with pencil scrawl, "Do not touch." Inside were bandages, a jar of honey, a compass, and a note written in a different hand. "They're safe. Don't look for them. They'll be fine." The tin with the compass and bandages changed everything. Up to that point, we'd all assumed the Carsons were alone. That after John died, Linda had done her best to keep the kids safe, hiding deep in the brush until time or weather or desperation caught up with them. But that note, "They're safe. Don't look for them. They'll be fine. It was in someone else's hand, someone who hadn't been part of the original picture. And whoever it was, they had been close enough to the root cellar to leave supplies, to write in present tense. Angela had the handwriting analyzed, but no matches came back. Not from the family, not from Tatum, not from anyone on record. That's when she started rechecking property lines, easements, hunting shacks, places no one had surveyed in decades. And that's how we found Roy Carson. His name hadn't shown up in the earlier files because technically he didn't exist, at least not in the systems we'd searched. No birth certificate, no tax returns. But buried deep in the land records from 1946 was a hand-drawn deed for a parcel just west of the lake. A few acres, marked by trees, not fence. Turns out Roy was John Carson's cousin. Half-brother, really. Their father had a second family no one talked about. Roy had come and gone over the years, lived off the grid mostly. But neighbors remembered him. Said he kept to himself. Said there was a stretch sometime around '86 when they saw smoke from his chimney almost every day. Angela drove out there with Malone and 2 deputies. They found the shack boarded up, almost swallowed by the woods. Inside was a cot, some empty jars, and a shelf lined with children's books. Some had names inside the cover, Emily C. and Tyler C., scribbled in ballpoint pen. On the wall, more carvings. The same initials, the same handwriting. Angela called me from the site. Her voice was steady but tight. They were here. All of them. She didn't have to say what we were both thinking, that maybe they'd made it further than we believed. Maybe they'd even lived here. For months, maybe longer. The next week brought more pieces. Forensics dated the food scraps, the burned logs, the clothing fibers. Everything pointed to occupation well into the fall of 1986. Months past the date we assumed they were gone. In the ashes of the stove, they found a metal spoon warped from heat. It had been engraved "Love Mom." One of the kids' things. Preserved all this time. And then a name surfaced. A man named Eugene Smoke Rutledge. He'd done odd jobs around the lake in the 70s and early 80s. Lived out of his truck. No address, no phone. He was picked up for petty theft in '85, then vanished off the grid. What made Angela pause was an old intake form from his brief stint in county jail. On the emergency contact line, he'd written R. Carson, Lake Whitney. They tracked Smoke through old DMV records. Found a last known location tied to a salvage yard about an hour north. One of the deputies called ahead and a manager confirmed someone by that name had worked there. Quiet guy, kept to himself, lived in a trailer behind the lot. But he hadn't been seen in over 10 years. Left without notice. Took only what he could carry. Angela went there herself. The trailer was still on the property, mostly rusted through. Inside there wasn't much, but taped to the underside of a drawer was a Polaroid. Blurry, faded, but clear enough to make out a woman holding 2 children. All 3 were smiling. The boy held a slingshot. The girl had wild curls and a missing front tooth. We sent it to the lab, scanned it, blew it up, compared it to the Carson family photos. It was them. A little thinner, a little older, but alive. After the disappearance. Somewhere. At least for a time. That photo never made the news. Angela kept it close, only shared it with the family. Linda's sister took one look and covered her mouth. Said she'd seen that missing tooth on Emily's school portrait right before they left for the lake. The sheriff's department couldn't pursue charges against Smoke. He hadn't committed a known crime, and no one could locate him. But his role was clear now. Someone who took them in, hid them, fed them, maybe kept them alive longer than we ever imagined. Whether he did more than that, we may never know. As for Tatum, he was charged with unlawful disposal of human remains, obstruction, and tampering with evidence. He died in custody before trial. Heart failure. Quiet. Unremarkable. No final words. no confession beyond what we already had. Roy Carson never surfaced either. If he was alive, he hadn't used his real name in years. Angela said she believed he helped the family not out of guilt but out of some unspoken loyalty to blood. The kids were his kin. That counted for something. The official case file was closed in early spring. No new leads, no new sightings. But not a week went by that Angela didn't check the tip line or reread the notes, and sometimes in quiet moments she'd take out the photo, the one with the toothless grin and the crooked slingshot, and set it beside the original family picture from the campground. The difference was unmistakable. They had aged, grown, lived, if only briefly. We thought that might be the end. But then, a month after the file was archived, Angela got a letter. No return address. Postmarked Missouri. Inside was a single word, stop, written in the same block lettering as before. I still walk by the edge of the lake sometimes, not often. Just when the air feels the same as it did that fall, still a little wet with the kind of quiet that sinks deep into your chest. The campground's been cleaned up now. The old markers are gone, the trees trimmed back. But the water hasn't changed. It still looks the way it did when we found Linda's wedding ring wedged between the boards, like it's holding something beneath it. Something old. Something that never really left. Angela retired last year. Packed up her office, boxed the case files. She didn't say much about the Carsons, just nodded when I asked if she'd kept the photo. She had. Said she never could bring herself to throw it out. We still don't know who wrote those notes, or who taught Emily to carve letters into wood with such small, patient hands. But someone was there. Someone helped them, and someone didn't want them found. There were theories, sure, more than I can count. That Smoke took them all the way to Missouri. That Roy built another shack somewhere deeper in the woods. That Linda didn't die when Tatum said she did. That maybe, just maybe, one of the kids is still out there living under another name, keeping the past buried the way the grown-ups around them did. I don't know. And I've stopped needing to. What I do know is that the story we were told at first, the one where the family vanished into thin air, swallowed by a lake storm, wasn't the truth. They didn't just disappear. They survived. For a while, at least. They built fires. They read books. They left carvings in beams and spoons in stoves. They lived long enough to leave behind a story no one expected. One that still whispers through the trees when the wind moves just right. I think about Linda most when I pass that trailhead. She wasn't perfect. But I believe she tried. I believe she did what she could with what little she had. And when that wasn't enough, she leaned on someone else. Someone she trusted. That trust misplaced or not bought them time. And that time matters. There's a marker now near the edge of the lake. Just a small wooden post with their names carved into it. No plaque. No ceremony. Just something quiet to say they were here. That they mattered. That we remember. And I think that's enough. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause or remember someone you once knew, share it. Not for numbers, not for clicks, but because names, especially the ones buried deep, deserve to be spoken again.